Senator, we're good to go. First things first, I just happened to see you sent out no more than 2 minutes ago that you and Blumenthal are introducing the Resources for Victims of Gun Violence Act. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
It's really important that we understand that the cost of gun violence in this country is not just the number of people who have been killed. There are victims of gun violence that include those who were shot and survived, and family members who go through all sorts of terrible trauma when they lose a son or a daughter, a cousin, a brother to gun violence. And so we've introduced this legislation to make sure that we have services available all around the country to deal with this epidemic. I wish this legislation weren't necessary, but until we get this problem under control, we've got to make sure that we have counseling services, grievance services available to people all across the nation.
All right, talk to me also about the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, part of the reason why the president is coming on Friday. Of course, being that gun violence is such a multifactorial problem, why is this act looking at the right levels of focus in terms of trying to stop gun violence? How is it focusing on the right things that it needs to focus on?
The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed a year ago. It is the first major piece of gun violence legislation passed in Congress in 30 years, the first time that Congress bucked the NRA and passed something that's going to keep our communities and our kids safer. It's not everything we have to do, but man, it's a big step forward. It's a big expansion of the background check system, more guns going through background checks. We take away weapons from all domestic abusers. That was not the case under prior law. We have a new enhanced background check for under 21 buyers, because we know a lot of these mass shooters tend to go into a gun store, buy an assault weapon, and then carry out the crime shortly thereafter. And then we invest in states like Connecticut that have passed red flag laws, and we give money to those states to help them implement that red flag law. On top of that, there's $15 billion in school safety, mental health, and community safety money. I know sometimes people don't know what it's a big number in Washington these days. $15 billion is a lot of money. And so that money alone is going to save lives all across the country and make our schools safer. So this is a really big step forward. I'm excited that the president is coming to Connecticut to talk about how we've used this law to save lives and how much work we still have to do.
Do the red flag laws have the greatest amount of evidence behind them that they could work in terms of all the different things you could do to try to stop gun violence, discrete things?
Shortly before we passed the law last year, Connecticut used our red flag law to take guns away from a young man who had actually threatened to shoot up a school. And that's happening all over the country right now. States like Florida that have good red flag laws, they take away thousands of weapons just temporarily from people who are threatening harm to themselves or to others. There's just no doubt that they work. And the good news is more states are passing red flag laws. More states are strengthening their red flag laws like we did in Connecticut, and the funding in last year's bill is helping them do that.
In the court of public opinion, I'm sure you've heard it a million times, people will say, this is another law, and criminals almost by definition don't follow laws. Why would this work then, given that?
Well, we know for certain that stronger gun laws make our communities safer. Connecticut has a gun violence rate that's way too high, but it is 300% lower than Florida's gun violence rate or Louisiana's gun violence rate, states with very loose gun laws. Just look at the state experience. The states with the tough gun laws, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, California, have the lowest rates of gun violence in the country. So it's just not it's an NRA talking point that, oh, criminals don't follow the laws, so why have laws? Well, if that were the case, we wouldn't have laws against arson and rape and murder. We have laws because people end up following the laws. Not everybody, but lots of people do. And that's why Connecticut has led the way on tightening our gun laws.
Going above and beyond while we have some time, obviously there's a big correlation between the amount of guns that a given country has and the rate of gun violence, but that's where you run into a problem. How do you sort of deproliferate guns in the United States without actually going on a gun grab, which would be a constitutional problem?
Yeah, nobody's talking about taking anybody's guns away, but what we know is a lot of crime guns get purchased or transferred right before the crime happens. So if you put into place a universal background check system where all of a sudden no criminal can buy a gun anywhere, online, at a gun show, at a bricks and mortar store, If you take the assault weapons off the street, you can't buy those in the secondary market or in the primary market. That will reduce gun violence rates in this country. Yes, it's true. There's lots of guns already out there. Nobody's talking about taking those guns away from anybody, but a lot of the guns that get used have been transferred or bought right before they were used in a crime. So there's no doubt that if we tighten our laws, we won't eliminate gun violence, but it'll keep a lot of people alive.
Just a couple more questions quick. First of all, the president coming was going to make a lot more eyes on this summit meeting on Friday. I believe the president had said he wants federal gun laws, or at least national gun laws, to follow a lot of the examples led by Connecticut. Just how big is it for this summit meeting to have him there?
I'm so excited the president is coming. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act wouldn't have passed last summer without the president's support. And of course, he's in charge of implementing every piece of that law. So to get an update from him personally really matters. And, you know, for us in Connecticut, having gone through what we went through in Sandy Hook, having dealt with shootings in Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport every weekend, it's great to have him with us. We really feel like we have lent a lot to the anti-gun violence movement in this country, and to have the president come to Connecticut and recognize that, I think that's going to be really meaningful.
What is the feeling, just switching topics a quick second, given the former president's looming arraignment today down in Miami, what is the feeling amongst lawmakers on Capitol Hill in terms of the precedent this is setting, the necessity or lack of necessity, depending on who you're talking to, and just where we go in terms of security for what's happening there today?
Well, as a practice, I tend to, stay out of law enforcement decisions. I don't give advice to police officers or to prosecutors or judges as to the law enforcement decisions they make, who to arrest and who to prosecute. Obviously, what the president has been accused of is, pretty serious, and I have faith that, down in Miami, they have what they need in order to make sure that everything remains under control today.
One more question. I know two of your biggest focuses, one obviously gun violence, the other lately seems to have been loneliness. Just how much overlap is there on the Venn diagram between those two, in your opinion, and what data do we have to show that there's any overlap between the two?
Well, I care about this epidemic of loneliness because I think it's a problem, period, stop, for adults and for kids. I'm the parent of a teenager and a preteen, and their generation is experiencing just epidemic rates of loneliness. I don't necessarily think it solves the gun violence epidemic, even if we were to make people less lonely, because there are lots of lonely people in other countries, but America is the country with all the gun violence, not because we have more mental illness or that much more loneliness. It's because we allow people who are having a break from reality to get their hands on weapons of mass destruction. So to me, if you want to take on the gun violence epidemic, you have to take on the easy access of guns in this country.
Would you like to talk more at a later date just about loneliness as a discrete topic?
I'm happy to do it. I'm going to run down to votes now, but I appreciate the time.
Okay. Thank you,
Thanks,
Senator.